Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. What's the real story behind the City Council's split vote over police funding this year? How will a new addition in labor standards impact a growing number of gig workers in our economy? And why is Councilmember Lisa Herbold not running for another term? And what effect will that have on city politics? We're talking to Councilmember Herbold herself to ask these questions, and yours too, next on Council Edition.
SPD would have to meet its hiring goals for 10 years. Every year for 10 years straight to use up all those 130 remaining positions.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here she is, Councilmember Lisa Herbold from District 1, from South Park and West Seattle, all the way up to Pioneer Square now, following the redistricting process. Thank you very much for joining me. And we do have some ground to cover, but I want to make sure that I start with one piece here. We are going to get into the fact that you're not going to be running for your position again, but I want to dive into some budget issues with you, because there was an investment in affordable housing that happened in this budget that seemed to take the backstage, which I think any other year it would have been front page news. Can we talk about that? We haven't heard a lot about it, but it was a very important part of the budget that was just passed a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Bring it on.
Yeah, what happened there? Where are the investments? Where are they going?
Sure. Well, they're investments that are consistent with our spend plan for Jumpstart. We're looking at more than doubling our typical annual housing levy investments. Not the dollars that will be going out next year aren't just from the housing levy and from the mandatory housing affordability program, but they're also dollars that were generated through the Jumpstart payroll tax.
Got it. And about $500 million, if I'm counting it right, over the next 2 years. And this is for different affordable housing projects that are shovel ready, et cetera, because I know that there's always a backlog of that the city is dealing with. Where's this money going to go in terms of that?
Every time the Office of Housing does what's called a request for proposals, there are many, many, many more applicants than there are dollars for. And this time around, we might actually have the number of dollars necessary to meet the need.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure that I touch on a couple issues. I always get emails about housing from constituents here, and I wanted to throw them out here. Actually, I have two advocates that are kind of on different sides of the housing spectrum that always send me questions, and I thank both of you for doing that. Here's what they want to know. Eric writes this first. I cannot convert my finished garage into an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, because land use rules prevent converting off-street parking into a habitable space. The city used to have a parking waiver program for this. Why not start that up again? Okay, we got that. Then we've got a small landlord asking this. What are the impacts of all the tenant regulations you've championed? There's a noted loss of small-scale rental housing. In your final year of office, will you listen to small landlords a tiny bit? Thank you very much for the questions. Could you talk to me about this, getting more ADUs online, helping small landlords? These are maybe small issues for some people, but they're big issues in the housing sector.
The city has done a lot to liberalize the land use standards that allow for the development of ADUs. And, you know, I'm sorry that this particular person is writing with frustration and not being able to use those new liberalized standards. I hear from other constituents who are frustrated that ADUs are going up in their community.
I see.
So I feel like maybe that means that we hit the balance just right. We know that we are definitely increasing the number of ADUs. I'm not on the land use committee.
That's right. That's true.
And so I don't know the nuances of this particular problem that this constituent has, but I do know for a fact that the ADUs are going up.
Okay. And this issue with small landlords, I know I've heard from a number of them over this past year here with a lot of different tenant regulations in place. Some thoughts about that?
Yeah. The idea that a lot of small landlords have left the market is not one that we have data on. People point to the rental housing registration program and the number of landlords that are registered as compared to previous years as evidence of that. During COVID, the Department of Constructions and Inspections suspended their enforcement of the requirement to register. So that's a big reason why we see so many fewer landlords registered.
I see. Didn't realize that. Thank you for answering those questions, and thanks for sending those in to both of those writers there. I want to talk about the budget again in terms of the work that you've done as chair of the Public Safety Committee. Mayor sent down a budget that shifted money from 200 unfilled positions in the Seattle Police Department to the general fund, but still gave the department the hiring authority to fill those positions later. Just want to make sure we're getting the story straight here. The final proposal the council approved, while fully funding the SPD's hiring plan, which is an important part here, eliminates 80 of those unfunded positions, and that whole concept really split the council here. Council members Peterson and Nelson both said no to the final package, as you know, joining Councilmember Sawant's annual opposition. Here's what Councilmember Nelson said in the meeting prior to her vote.
This is just simply not the budget that I've been advocating for, and I think it's out of sync with what most people in Seattle want. So I don't take this lightly, but I'll be voting no.
Councilmember Nelson really thought this move with the SPD could be seen as weakening the department and played into a defund narrative. I know you see this a much different way. Please break that down, these ideas that you're talking about.
I certainly do see it much differently, and I was really disappointed that the decision, which was a budgetary decision that didn't have any fiscal impact on the ability to hire, that it was portrayed by some folks in the press as well as my colleagues in the way that it was. I think they themselves are promoting a defund narrative. The reduction of the police department of 80 unfunded vacant positions, again, has no impact on the ability of SPD to hire fully for its staffing plan. There are still another 130 vacant unfunded positions in the budget. And what that means is that SPD would have to meet its hiring goals for 10 years, every year for 10 years straight, to use up all those 130 remaining positions.
Yeah, I guess in looking a little more deeply at that, I can understand that this is a council that's kind of finding its feet in some ways when it comes to learning about this budget and also this whole narrative, if you want to call it that, over public safety and police. But I think about this in terms of our soon-to-be new police chief. Confirmation hearings happening just a short while before we had this discussion here. How does Chief Diaz view this whole back and forth? Because I know last year, when he was still interim chief, he was kind of upset about this. Sent a video out there while the council was going through its budget process with this whole concept of abrogation. Didn't do that this year. It's a different year. But can you talk to me about what the chief thinks about this situation? Because I know you talk to him a lot when it comes to not filling or not having these 80 positions, eliminated, I should say, in the budget.
Yeah, I really think what we heard last year versus what we heard this year, a lot has to do with who our mayor is. Our mayor is a mayor who believes that we are stronger when we emphasize the things that we agree on. Last year, again, there was fear and misinformation whipped up about the idea of abrogating vacant, unfunded positions that would have no impact on the ability to hire. Just really pleased to see that that level of misinformation isn't happening anymore.
And I wanted to make sure I went into one piece here, because when it comes to hiring that is happening in the Seattle Police Department right now, hasn't been all that rosy a picture over the past year or so, but there are some signs of life here. Can you speak to that issue? Because I know the chief is happy to see that, certainly, and wants to continue that trend. What's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the council in the fall voted to fund a few different things. We voted to fund a bonus program to incentivize new officers coming on. It's a financial incentive to pay either laterals coming from other departments or new recruits. We voted for a new recruitment staff. The department only had one recruiter at the time. We funded additional backgrounders to work to make sure that the application process moves more quickly. And we funded a new program that allows for the city to pay for relocation costs for new employees to the city in hard-to-fill positions, including SPD. And then finally, we began to fund portions of the mayor's proposed hiring and recruitment program. We double down on those investments in the budget process this year. So we'll be continuing to fund those investments moving forward in 2023. And even though, as you say, we are starting to see progress, we have to be really realistic with what progress looks like. We're looking at about 15 net new hires. So that takes into consideration all of the new hires minus people who are either retiring or moving on to other departments.
Right.
So we're looking at about 15 net new hires in 2023 and 2024. And one of the things that we heard today in the chief's confirmation process was a lot of discussion around how that's not going to be sufficient, and how the fact that that's not going to be sufficient underscores the importance to develop alternatives to uniformed policing.
And I want to touch on those alternatives in just a minute here, but in looking at that, is there a right number of police officers? I know Chief Diaz, when he was still interim, was talking about 1,400. We're not really near that right now. It's closer to what's less than 1,000. I know that right now. Is there a right number that we need to have X amount of officers for X amount of population? How do you look at that? How does the chief look at that? How does your public safety committee look at that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The chief has pointed to the number of 1,400 as the target for SPD. It's a complex question.
Yeah.
There was a study done a few years ago. It's inconclusive of whether or not we've really embraced the numbers associated with that study, that sort of what is the right size. I can tell you, though, that a lot of people point to the size of a city and other cities, particularly other cities on the East Coast, as evidence that we need a particular number that matches that per capita. Per capita approach towards hiring is not the recommended best practice. And then I just, again, underscore that the 1,400 number of officers is to serve a Seattle Police Department that is primarily doing the same functions as it does now.
Right, right.
Again, as we move towards alternatives, I think it's going to be really important to look at that number, because alternatives don't just mean 911 calls that don't need an armed police officer. It also means things like online reporting, which we currently have an online reporting system that is underused because it's not very functional. It doesn't have languages built in. It doesn't allow for reporting of several different types of criminal activity that I know the public wants to be able to report.
Right. Okay. Can I jump onto those alternatives with you? Because this dual dispatch proposal, I believe you sponsored this. The council passed in the budget this new way to respond to 911 calls. So you've got social workers, civilians that could essentially get dispatched here, as well as or in place of police officers on certain calls. I know it's a pilot program, and I know it's supposed to be starting sometime early next year, but I just had this big underlying question. Are 911 dispatchers ready for this? Are they ready to make that decision on, okay, with this kind of call, it's okay to send just an outreach worker. With this, we need police. And what does that look like? And what happens if they're wrong in those different cases? I know it's something that you've looked into.
Yeah. And so that's what we've been building in the background over the last year. I know that there's a lot of frustration that we don't have this new system stood up yet. My colleague, Councilmember Lewis, talked at great length in committee today about the fact that in Albuquerque, New Mexico, they stood up a third public safety department in 6 months and already had an alternatives to police response program. But we have been doing the work as it relates to the infrastructure. And so last year, in the last year's budget process, we funded a new dispatch protocol system that I've talked to you about before.
Yes.
That has been purchased. It's being implemented, and 911 dispatchers are being trained on it. It's a system that allows for sort of a a question tree approach
right.
as opposed to a yes or no.
I see, okay.
And part of the reason why we've spent time, and the department has spent time doing different risk analysis. You've heard of the Nick Jr. report.
Yeah, the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform. There we go.
You got it. More recently, there's been sort of, SPD hired outside consultants to sort of do a check on that report. And what they're doing is they're identifying call types that could be eligible. And that system is going to be built into the 911 operator system.
Okay.
They're not just identifying call types that 100% of those call types will always be diverted. It's actually a system that is overlaid into the 911 call center system. And so the calls that come in, they can determine what the risk factor is for an alternate response.
Okay, thank you, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that gets rolled out in the new year. But there was a very specific addition when it comes to public safety for District 1 in this budget, supporting Seattle Fire's Ladder 13 and Medic Truck 26. There was a need for this service, definitely, when the West Seattle Bridge was shut down. This was helping out kind of the south end of West Seattle there, but these units now are going to stay in place. I know this was a bit of a challenging ad during a tight budget year, but can you talk about this? I think this is very interesting. It's not just one area that's getting helped here. This could really have a ripple effect across the city.
That's exactly correct. You know, one of the things that made this budget campaign so gratifying to me is that I heard from so many people in District 1 who had experienced the life-saving services of the ladder truck and the medic unit, and that really made for a compelling story. But we also had the data that shows maintaining that infrastructure in West Seattle and in South Park saves minutes, and these are life-saving minutes. And as you say, the ability to have these services in West Seattle and South Park means that a ladder truck or an aid car doesn't have to come from further away. And that means that that ladder truck and aid car in another geographic area of the city can better serve the people in need there.
Right. Even if you're going through red lights down 35th Avenue Southwest, it's going to take some time to get there from the north side. So I appreciate that breakdown. There was one other public safety issue I wanted to talk about with you. You recently went to a symposium on gun violence with a number of local officials. This was a couple of weeks ago. The stats we're seeing on gun violence in Seattle are starting to improve, but we're really coming off a very active and deadly summer, as you know, not to mention the terrible school shooting that we had in Ingram just back in November. What works, what doesn't? What did you learn in this gun violence symposium? Is there anything that's folded into the budget more specific to this? What can you tell us?
Yeah, you know, one thing I learned is that there are an awful lot of people doing incredible work in this area throughout our region, and they're doing community-based work to prevent gun violence, to interrupt violence, and the cycle of violence that we often see in communities. And you know, you're right, gun violence has really increased, but one of the things that you don't see is the areas in which it's decreased, because you kind of can't see a negative. One of the areas where we're seeing improvements is gun violence among young people.
I see.
And you probably have heard me talk about the Harborview hospital-based program.
Right.
It's based on a simple theory that victims of gun violence and their families and loved ones can, if not helped, become, and are more likely, frankly, to become offenders of gun violence.
I see.
And this is a wraparound program that has done amazing work. It is evidence-based, and it is producing reductions in gun violence in that cohort of people under 24.
Yeah, making those.
We are seeing
there.
increases, though, in older adults.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that piece down. I really wanted to jump on one other piece with you, Councilmember Herbold. It was another tough budget ad, putting the council's Pay Up program more fully into effect with some funding provided for the Office of Labor Standards here. The council approved this program to establish a minimum wage for gig workers back at the end of May, first of its kind in the nation we're talking about here. Now you're adding some resources to the Office of Labor Standards to make sure the program sticks. It's doing what it said it was going to do. Gig work is such a fast-growing part of our economy. What's this budget amendment going to do? What can you tell us?
Sure. So the funding that was provided in the budget for 2023 and 2024 is in part to fund the implementation of the pay-up regulation. This legislation will not go into effect until January 1st, 2024.
Okay.
And so one of the things that the Office of Labor Standards has to do is it has to do rulemaking to basically put a finer point on how workers use the ordinance, use the rights in the ordinance, and how employers comply with it.
Right.
And then a lot of outreach and education. One thing to keep in mind with the Office of Labor Standards, it's only been around since 2015.
Yeah.
It's a small and mighty office. Since 2015, the Office of Labor Standards has put nearly $31 million into the pockets of more than 52,000 workers in Seattle. So this investment that we're making in enforcing the city's 9 local labor laws is resulting in money in workers' pockets.
Right, and I know pay-up is kind of just getting started here. There's going to be some regulations with regard to bathroom breaks and things of this nature in the years upcoming here. Was it difficult to push this one across the line? I know there were a lot of things that were really on the fence this budget session. How about this one?
The funding?
Yeah.
For, I think I want to, take this opportunity to thank our budget chair.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mosqueda is somebody who has had oversight of the Office of Labor Standards like I have in past years, and she knows how important it is to adequately fund the department. Yeah,
thank you. I'm going to start wrapping up with you here with a question I know a lot of people have had for you over the past several days here about your decision not to run again for office in 2023. You have worked for the city in some capacity for decades here. It's a big part of your life. I know you served 2 terms on the council. You served as a legislative aide before that. Certainly something you're passionate about. Why are you not seeking another term, and what does this mean for District 1 and its future representation?
Yeah, I've been doing this work for what I like to refer to as the very best branch of local government, the legislative department. And I've been doing it for 26, well, it'll be 26 years at the end of next year.
Wow.
And it's...
You started when you were 2 years old? Get out of here.
Right, thanks.
Okay,
Thank
sure,
you.
yeah, okay. I tried, yeah.
And it's been really the highlight of my life. I really believe that local government is the government that's closest to the people, and if we can encourage positive change at the local level, people have more faith in their government. But as I reported out on my blog when I said that I had made the decision, more than even my love of serving the residents of District 1, I really believe that we need another progressive to serve District 1, to serve the council. And I think an open seat for that position will drive turnout. I think a new progressive that people can get excited about is going to be really necessary. Progressives did really well in the midterm elections, but next year is going to be tough. And I just really believe I don't want to see what happened to City Attorney Pete Holmes happen here. Without getting into party politics.
Sure,
Let's
right.
just stick with. I want to see a progressive in that seat.
Yeah. What does it mean for the future of representation there? You mentioned this different progressive voice or whatever else, but this can be such a very interesting thing to focus on when it's just one district, not a citywide position. Is that what District 1 needs? Is that what they want? What are you hearing?
Well, I think one of the most important things that people want is another thing, an attribute, if I say so myself, that I brought to this office, and it's the paying attention to constituent services and getting back to people to address their concerns, and that takes up a lot of time and really requires somebody who again, is committed to lifting the voices of their constituents to address the kinds of things in their neighborhood that that make a difference. And so I think one of the things that people will need to hear in the campaigns next year is that regardless of whether or not somebody is going to be the same sort of champion as I've been for workers' rights and renters' rights and progressive taxation, they're going to want to hear that they're going to get responses when they have complaints about the condition of the parks or the conditions of the streets, their utility bills not being too high, you know, all those types of constituent casework that I and my staff spend so much time on.
Yeah, and I know that these are bruising campaigns. I remember 2019 sitting right with you and Phil Tavel right here and talking about that. I guess just in your experience, 26 years working with the council as an LA and past 2 terms as a council member, how has the council changed? Districting has made for some interesting situations. What in my 11 years doing this job, it has seemed a lot more collegial and now is a little bit more competitive. And I don't know if you see that, but I'm trying to figure out what's changed over the years in terms of city council and what it means to run for this position.
I mean, I think the main thing that has changed is it's less, to me, about the collegiality of the council members, the relationship with the mayor. It's what's most changed, I think, is the tenor of politics generally. Whether and it's very polarized. People have high expectations, sure, as they should, yeah, for their elected officials. We work for the taxpayers, yeah, but people are frustrated and are not shy about expressing their frustration in a way that is, I think, is new to me as somebody who has worked on the council in some capacity for 26 years.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know I'm going to talk to you again before you leave office, Councilmember Herbold, but thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. Thank you for all that you've said here, and we will see you next time on Council Edition.